Yeah, I mean the fact that you have so many canals and waterways, I think, is testament to the fact that it is very wet on that side of the world. But
It
in any
is.
case, Sadhana, thank you so much. Thank you so much for joining me on the OfferZen podcast. It's such a pleasure to have you here.
It's nice to be here. Very excited.
So before we dive into our conversation, I've prepped a few rapid-fire icebreaker questions that you couldn't prepare for. The idea is to not catch you off guard. It is simply to get to know you a bit better. So I'm going to start with the first one. After a really tiring day, how do you spend your evening?
Haha. Okay. More people know of this guilty pleasure of mine. When I'm too tired to think, I basically just zone out in front of old reruns of Grey's Anatomy. And it makes me, so I look at that and I think, my job is it's not so bad. At least I don't kill people.
Yeah.
So it makes me feel better.
I think that is one of the best answers I've had so far for that question. So thank you for indulging me. And then, do you prefer tea or coffee?
Well, used to be a coffee lover, but now more and more I seem to prefer, very light brew, and I'm experimenting with different flavors of tea currently.
And then, what is a really good work-related book that you've read recently?
Ooh, I think one book which I'm recommending to everybody in my team as well is called Accelerate. And it's a brilliant book which talks about how engineering teams can become really high-performing teams. And it shows like a direct correlation between high-performing engineering teams and high-performing organizations. So it's not a whim for engineers to want to do better. It has a direct correlation to the baseline of the company. I found that extremely insightful.
Fantastic. I will put that link in the content at the end in case anyone's curious. And then, what is something you wish existed but doesn't?
Wish existed but doesn't. The hypercapsule already. I think that would make life so much simpler. Especially now that we are all becoming more and more remote in our way of working. I think that would open up possibilities like nothing else.
Yeah, I'm always there for speedy new tech.
Yes,
whatever
indeed.
It is. Very cool.
Indeed.
And then, what is something that you're glad you said no to recently, and why?
That's a good one. Actually, I have been saying no to some of the responsibilities that I had taken on when I took on this role originally, because my focus has shifted in the last months, and I'm also refining my role a little bit more to suit my strengths. So what I did was I sat down and I took a good hard look and said, okay, these are all the set of things that I do right now, but there's probably more impact to be created in certain tasks than others, number one. And number two, there are probably certain tasks which are better done by a few other people than me. So, so I reorganized my role a little bit, so to speak. So I said no to a few things, and I'm very glad I did.
Very cool. And then last question. What is something that's cost you less than €50 but was the best investment most recently?
The cushion that I'm sitting on. I always used to have a standing desk at work.
Yeah.
And the last year, I should say, has not been very kind on my back. So, And I always thought somehow I was in a state of denial, and I said, oh, this is a temporary state of being. So I'm not going to really invest in a full-fledged workplex.
Yes.
But recently I gave in and I invested in it, and I'm so thankful I did.
There's a few things which I think people overlook as investments, and one of them that you've just mentioned now is like a proper work setup, like having a chair that is
Yes.
like really comfortable, that is the right height, a desk that is the right height, that has enough space for everything. But interestingly, the other one which I've definitely leaned into a lot more in my adulthood has been a good mattress, because
Yes.
it's one of those things that actually impacts your day dramatically. And I
Yes.
think the
Absolutely.
like a cushion for a chair is such a small thing, such a small purchase, but really makes a huge difference. But
Yes.
thank you for
Absolutely.
indulging me and giving me some insight into who you are. That was really interesting. To kick
Yeah.
us off, because I don't know if
Yeah.
people have heard of Independer before, so could you start by giving me and everyone listening a little bit of insight into what problem it solves as a company?
Cool. Yeah. Happy to. I think Independer is probably one of the first fintech e-commerce companies in the Netherlands. It's a B2C company, which basically helps people choose financial products. It gives them a very
Mm-hmm.
super intuitive sort of flow where they can really look at what product suits them best and gives them a very intuitive comparison table across all products. And of course, also actually gives them suggestions based on their situation as to what the best product is in their situation. So in many cases, I think Independer was a market disruptor. It's a 20-year-old company now, and it is the market
Yeah.
leader by far when it comes to the insurance and personal financial products. It was basically, interestingly, it was originally founded on the Robin Hood principles, um, where three guys from who were working in banks got together and said, "We got to make it easier for people to take their own financial decisions into their own hands." You know,
Yeah.
and that's basically how Independent was born. So you will see this Robin Hood philosophy very firmly entrenched in everything that Independent does. The idea is that we make things, difficult financial
Yeah.
decisions, super easy
Yeah.
and super intuitive for people to make. So,
And how
so that's
does
basically
go for it?
how it started off, indeed. And I think for a long time it was known as a big comparison website where you could make very detailed comparisons on the different insurance products. But in the recent years, we are sort of rebranding ourselves as the one-stop shop for all your fixed costs, right? So be it
Yeah.
insurance products, be it loans, be it mortgages. So we want to be the one-stop shop where you could just maintain all your personal financial products.
And how does software play into that? Like, what role, or how do you solve that problem with software?
Yeah, so basically, our product in its core is a digital product. What we do is we collect. So our product is basically our platform, right? That's the only product that Independer has, right? Because it does not own insurance products. What we do is we collect information from our customers and we
Yeah.
match it against the different insurance products that we have interfaced with insurance companies, and we try to find a match, right? And all of this, the whole process is basically um, it's basically the software which makes this happen, right?
Yeah.
The whole process is digital, and we have, of course, an excellent customer center which helps people if they want to. But the idea is for our platform to be so intuitive and so easy to use that people are just able to do it themselves.
Yeah.
So what we are doing is we are abstracting away all the complexity of something as complex as an insurance product, and we are actually building that into our systems.
And as someone who obviously plays a role in the product from a technical point of view, what is hard or interesting about that challenge for you as a software professional?
Yeah, so of course, the thing is, as a product in itself, and as an e-commerce platform, I think insurance and financial products are actually, they're not the easiest things to get people excited about, so
Yes.
we are not like a fashion site, or where we can have huge bonanza sales. And I love, those are things that I would just love to keep visiting. And insurance is
Yeah.
something that people do, like, okay, I have to take care of it. But then
Yes.
how
Yes.
can we make that into a reasonably fun and insightful experience? Because they do need these products, and we do want to activate them to
Yes.
think about it,
Yeah.
and how can we give them the super intuitive platform while still abstracting away most of the complexity from them. you know
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
always an interesting challenge. It's always an interesting synergy between product design and how we actually bring that design to fruition with the development of it. So it's
Very
super
cool.
interesting.
And roughly, how big is your development team? Like, what kind of size are you currently at?
So basically, if you look at so we work, of course, in a Scrum Agile fashion. And
Yes.
if you just look at the web developer department, which basically consists of backend developers, front-end developers, then we are around 35 members strong. But our Scrum teams are also really truly cross-functional. So we have product owners, we have developers, we have testers, we have designers, and we have business analysts who actually help the POs in making the business case for the user stories.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
if you consider the whole product organization, then we are, of course, much bigger. We're probably around 80 people.
Cool. And just briefly before we dive into our conversation, which I'm very excited to get to, I'm curious because I think engineering manager is a pretty well known title, but I think everyone defines it from company to company. So just before we start, so we know sort of what context you're coming from, how do you define what you do, or what are some of your main responsibilities?
Yeah. So as I mentioned, we work in a cross-functional. We basically work agile. The product organization works agile, and we have cross-functional teams. And my role is, I basically head the development and test organization. So what this means on a daily, day-to-day basis is that I work with the developers to make sure that our engineering teams are able to really perform at their maximum potential. And what does that mean? That means we define the development practices, we define the tooling, we look at infrastructure, and we have to communicate. I have to communicate with the head of infrastructure to make sure that we are on target, we are on budget, but we are also making sure that our teams can actually go at the speed that they want to go at. I also interface with the head of product to make sure that we work together to create common roadmaps for the product development itself.
Yeah. Yeah.
And of course, I have to make sure that the tech landscape is something which is so fast evolving, that it's always interesting to see to create the right balance between adding features and making sure
Oh
that
yeah.
your tech landscape is caught on. So that's always an
Yeah.
interesting conversation. It's always how so it's a balance between short term and long term goals, and you always need
Yeah.
to take both into consideration, right? So
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 that, I
those
mean,
are some of
that
my
that cool. I was going to say that covers really nicely what we're moving into now, because obviously because of your oversight and the people you interface with, you've been leading or at least heavily involved in a tech transformation at Independer. And we're going to dive into what that means exactly just now. But I thought what our conversation is going to unpack in any case is how you've approached that as an engineering manager, but specifically in terms of being able to see whether you're on the right track or not. And this has been like, I think in our previous chat, you mentioned it's been quite a learning experience for you in terms of finding ways of measuring value when doing an undertaking as big as a tech transformation. So, as I said, before we go into some of those practicalities, tell me a bit about like what this tech transformation meant at your company in particular, in terms of like the problems you solve or the problem you were trying to solve. But first, I think, what do you mean by transformation? Like, what does that actually mean to you?
So, transformation is basically to so when you are in a business where your core product is digital, you need to. What happens many times is that organizations' strategies evolve, but the platform or the core product, which is probably also a digital product, is not always keeping pace with the strategic directional changes, right? And what happens at some point is that it's not always able to serve the business or the strategic goals of the organization as well as it should be, right? And in our case, the transformation is really about how we can sort of align as technology and as product align to the bigger goals of Independer and be able to serve the vision of creating more value for our customers better, right? So that's basically what a transformation is.
So do you have an example of a strategic thing that your from a digital point of view, your technology or your infrastructure could no longer serve? Is there something that you have on the top of your mind that you can just use to illustrate how that looks?
So it's not that it could not be done. It is at what effort it took to do something.
Right.
Something as simple as, for example, strategically, the organization decided that we wanted to use a more data-driven approach to serve our customers better. We already know a lot about the people who come to our platform. How can we use that to make the choices even more simpler for them? Right? And this is a simple enough request because we have the information and we need to figure out a way to be able to extract it and use it in a way that actually helps our customers. But because of the platform and because of the way it was architected, because remember, it's also a 20-year-old platform, which is quite monolithic, the amount of complexity that was created to actually execute this feature was enormous. And the amount of maintenance and the amount of repairs that we had to create in the other parts of the website, because we were basically plastering one thing on top of another, that was, at some point we said, you know what, it cannot be this difficult to serve what seems to be very reasonable requests from the business, So
what does a transformation like that require from, what did that transformation require from you and your team?
I think so basically the most important thing to be noted here is that the transformation was actually not pushed down to the team. It was the team who already realized that we need to transform.
Yes.
Right? And once you have that mindset, I think the rest is just execution, right? Because the ideas are there. We have fantastic people who know the platform and who know how we can make it even better, right?
Yeah.
So at that point, it was just about actually getting people together and saying, hey guys, what can we do to get better? And then just sort of collecting ideas and putting them on a roadmap. And that's exactly what we did.
And okay, so I think, you've made it sound very simple, and it might have been for you, but I think a lot of people sometimes do struggle with this. So what was hard about what is hard? I'm not sure actually. Is this a transformation that you're still undergoing? Just to make sure I get the
Yes.
language right. Is this something that you
Yes.
Cool. So then, as I was saying, then what is hard about a transformation like this? And I think maybe we can touch on something which you noted in our previous conversation about knowing whether you're doing the right thing or not.
Yeah. So I think everybody knows what what to do, right? So that's the easy bit, and creating the roadmap is the easy bit. But indeed, so basically, what we did is we divided this whole process of creating the roadmap into 3 stages, right? We said first, let's take a very good hard look at where we stand. Okay, so what are the current vulnerabilities? What are the current challenges? If we want to serve business faster, if we want to serve our customers faster, what are the current situations in the current lay of the land which is actually holding us back from doing that,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And then we said, okay, what is our dream scenario? What do we think? And don't be limited by anything. What do we think would be the most coolest, most atrocious dream that we can sketch for ourselves as a department?
yeah,
And let's just put it there, right? And once that was done, was the how to get that part, right? So that's the actual execution. So we know where we stand and we know where we want to go, and how do we get there, right? And I think this is where things can get a little bit tricky, because if you get too set in your ways and you create like a 3-year-old roadmap, which you just
yeah,
are super attached to, and consists of long plans, and you're not willing to pivot on it, and you just have this piece of paper and you say, oh, I have it on my roadmap, so I will not change, then I think things become a lot less measurable, because you're
yeah.
saying, oh, I have a 3-year roadmap to get there, and I will measure it once I get to the third year, wherever imaginary place that I want to get to. And I think that if you do that, then you can get very lost in the process, because you will be a very different
Yes.
organization at the end of the third year, right?
Yeah.
So the hard part is, how are you going to measure it? How are you going to make it small enough, right? That you're able to pivot every time to say, does this make sense? Do we want to continue doing this? Do we want to roll back? And if you don't do that, then it's very easy to get lost.
So why is having a measurable roadmap so important? And maybe you can speak from your experience and tell me a story about a moment when that impact of having a roadmap that is measurable and that can be pivoted is so important.
Well, because I think when you start measuring in small steps, you already start seeing the improvements. It's not. It's the journey. In this case, I'm sorry to sound cliched, but in this case, it's actually the journey that matters more than the destination, I think, because uh, I don't think there is. No matter how good your architects are, no matter how good your project managers are, I don't think it's realistic to follow a 3-year-old roadmap. And I think with each small step that you execute, the the results are already clear to see, right? And you can see the improvement. You can see, and of course, the kind of metrics you choose depend on the reason that you want to do the transformation, right? Not all transformations are the same, and not all transformations are started for the same reason, right? Sometimes you're looking for speed, sometimes you're looking for stability, right? And depending on what you're doing the transformation for, the kind of metrics that you track will be very different, right? But the fact that you already see improvement will also bring about that change, and it's also a little bit like a flywheel, it's a little bit like one accelerates the other, and at some point all of these flywheels hopefully will have the enough, how do you call that, escape velocity to actually do the full transformation that is required to take our business to the next level.
So I'm going to try and paraphrase just to see if I'm understanding correctly, but there seems to be this difference between having a distant end goal in sight and being so focused on that you sort of just work through all the milestones along the roadmap to get that without taking too much notice of what's going on, which is risky in one sense, because if at any point you move 2 degrees to the left, it's going to compound and you're going to be 90 degrees off from where you want to be, as well as by measuring and tracking as you go and being less focused on the goal and more focused on the journey you're currently undergoing, you also are better able to see opportunities for like compounding positive changes that you can make, where you hadn't anticipated this opportunity, but then it presents itself in, I don't know, I'm trying to think of a good example, but maybe you find along the way that there is this feature that would help customers do X 3 times faster, which you hadn't anticipated, but because you're aware of that, you can factor that in, and your end solution is going to be much better.
Absolutely. Yep.
Cool. So I'd like to we're going to touch on the specific, or like at least the some of the metrics you've used or your practical approach for measuring impact just now. But just briefly, like what have you found it takes in order to have a measurable roadmap? Like what does what does it take from a leader or an engineering team to get it right?
Yeah. So indeed, so I think if you want to create a measurable roadmap, I think it's basically the third part of the roadmap, which I said, how do we get there, right? And then
yes,
I think you decide on, directionally you decide where you want to go, but many of the things you are really sort of agile in your way of thinking, and trying out small things, pivoting on it, rolling back when things don't work, but also also be willing to fail, but also be willing to share the learnings that come from the failure. And I think that's as important as anything else, and what you need for this is you need a team which basically is really which basically really buys into this dream, right? And also really understand the why very strongly, because if they don't understand the why very strongly, then they are just being operational, right? And then they're just executing the roadmap. But if they understand the why strongly, then they say, okay, you want me to do this, but I think there's more value in doing that, for instance, right? And there's so many wonderful engineers who've come up with great ideas and told me, you know what, you think we should be doing this, we really shouldn't be doing this. This is what we should be doing instead, right? And that's awesome. That's how you create a measurable roadmap. You make small, really break it down to the smallest possible steps, and then you start working towards it.
Cool. So on that note, I would love to use that opportunity to look a little bit, because we've been talking very high level, but to look a little bit deeper into how your measurable roadmap has looked practically. So can you just take me through, like, what things have you done to know if you're winning? So I don't know if there's particular metrics you want to touch on, or particular approaches or systems to know whether you're winning or not.
Yeah, so basically, what we did is, because we wanted to change so much and we wanted to do so much, we said that we want to basically divide these transformation into 5 areas, right? We wanted to, so the 5 areas are basically decoupling our architecture, right? And then getting better insights into what is actually happening in the site, which our product teams can actually pivot on. Creating or using more off-the-shelf components, basically, which is just straight off the, so basically, be it cloud tools or be it better tools from the market. Um, and then we said that for all of this to work, we need a really agile mindset, right? Where the whole product organization is working as one single team. So the agile mindset was also one area that we wanted to really, really work on. And I think all of this had to be very neatly tied by a very strong sort of engineering culture, where people are willing to experiment, people are willing to learn new tricks, people are willing to think in different ways.
Yes.
Right? So these were the 5 areas which we broke down our whole roadmap into. And once we did that, we started saying, okay, so if we say decoupled architecture, how are we going to do that? Okay, so we have X number of products. We want to be able to actually release each product separately from our monolith. So what we did is we took one product, which was our, well, the smallest product, but also the most, how do you call that, clean, because it was relatively new and relatively low in complexity. And we said, okay, you know what? Now we're just going to decouple this from the rest of our monolith and see how it works. Keep it small. So, and even there we said, okay, so let's first so what is the most value add? Okay, business or product, they really want to pivot on creating continuous experiments for the end users, for the clients. So it takes more value to decouple the front end of the platform than the back end. So that's what we're going to concentrate on. So really pivoting on each and every step and really breaking it down into the smallest possible step. And as a result, I think
I was just going to say the picture that comes to mind is almost like the way you nest bullet points. You almost have like five main topics. Within each one, you have a nested set of outcomes or tasks, and within each of those, you have nested, and then you literally tick off as you go from left to right.
Exactly. And not only that, so this was one area, right? And we were spending, and all the thing is that we cannot go all the way in one area while we just leave the rest of it out, right? All of them have to go hand in hand for it all to come together, right? So when we decoupled, we were also paying equal attention to automating our releases, which meant really paying attention to our to the way we tested, to our testing strategy. How are we going to maintain our test architecture? And that went right in, because even if you decouple, if you don't have an automation testing strategy, you cannot release things at will, right? So the idea is that you are able to release products at will with full confidence, which means you need to work on all of those charters and you need to make improvements in all of them rather than just focusing on one thing.
So that's interesting, because I can hear a lot of people saying that trying to do it all at once is a worse strategy than trying to focus on one thing at a time. Can you maybe speak to that a little bit?
It depends on what the everything means, right? Because in this case, the 5 areas that we identified are so closely, they almost have a symbiotic relationship, right? For example, you cannot have a decoupled architecture without having the infrastructure which will actually deliver the architecture to production. You cannot have just architecture and infrastructure without having a testing strategy which gives the developers the peace of mind to be able to deliver that piece of software, right? So
Yeah.
all of this is just, for us, these were not really things which we thought would deliver the value that we wanted to deliver by doing it separately. It
Yeah.
just couldn't have worked like that.
Yeah. And then when it comes to the actual completion of each of those, so I assume once you've gotten it down to your smallest piece, or each smallest bit, well, maybe before we get to that, how do you have any advice for knowing what the smallest piece is? If I'm breaking tasks down, like I'm sure there's like breaking it too far down is probably not as effective as, or is as ineffective as having it be super high level and encompass too many things in one. So did you have any advice for how to know when to stop breaking it down into the smallest pieces, or are you literally going as far as you can?
I think the going as far as I can is something that I leave to the teams who are actually executing
Yeah.
the charters, right?
Right.
So my role is to basically help them uh, come up with a roadmap which is going in the direction that we want to go. So it is, my role is only to course correct. It is not to actually figure out how to get there, because
Right.
I don't
Right.
have the deep expertise that some of my team members do in these areas to be able to provide them that roadmap, right?
Yeah.
So it is for them to come up with the how, and my role is restricted to challenging them to see if this is the best way that we can get there, right?
Right. Cool. And then, so the question I was going to ask before that one, how do you how do you measure impact throughout the process? Like, is there a system that you've set up, such as a retrospective after you've completed each like group, or do you have like a regular status update on each of the strategies, or how have you set it up so that you are stimulating that sort of measurability?
Yeah, it's a good question, because I think in any transformation of this kind, I think communication and keeping people really up to date on what is happening becomes really, really
Yeah.
important. Especially now that
Yeah.
we were sort of we are completely all working remotely. It's very easy to just get lost in your day-to-day bubble. So we did this with several ways. So we try to create visibility on different levels, right? From the top level to really within the teams. What we did is we created this transformation as one of the programs which has key focus at Independer from a strategic point of view. So this was done
Right.
by the management to make sure that everybody knows that this transformation is really, really crucial for Independer. That is number one.
Mm-hmm.
And number two, what we did is that, as I mentioned before, the roadmap and the areas that we talked about, we really divided it into charters, and we assigned an owner for each charter. And we developed like a 1 to 2 month roadmap with milestones that
Yes.
each charter would achieve. And then we have bi-weekly calls with each of the charter leads, where they report on, hey, we are on schedule to reach a particular milestone. But also if they say we are not on schedule and we need something else, or we decided to go a completely different way because of X, Y, and Z, right? Which is also
Yeah.
okay. But then we are continuously pivoting on it. We keep everybody communicated about it, and we are seeing the progress as we hit each milestone. So the people who are also working on this, they also know, hey, this is one milestone and I'm done. And that's mentally, I think that's like a huge boost for people.
Yeah. So I think interesting. Just want to highlight what you've said. The first thing, which I thought was a good point that you made was, in order to increase visibility, you need to give this thing status, which sort of speaks to like making it a company mission. It's like, this is a strategic thing we are doing, not just like, oh, that team's going to do something in the background. So I think that's interesting. And the second point about the increased visibility from your 1 to 2 month milestones, your bi-weekly calls, that makes sense to me from a increasing surface area for communication. And probably to your earlier point, because all 5 of these strategies are so interlinked, it's like one person's progress is going to affect yours at some point.
Exactly.
So having that visibility is super important. How did that impact the work you were, like the business as usual stuff? Because I'm just trying to think of all of these extra meetings and this extra mind share. How did that factor into the business as usual stuff? Did you have to adjust the workflow on the other side? Did you outsource that to another team? How did you think about that?
Yeah, that was indeed quite challenging, right? So what I did not want to do is really a sort of distributed model where one team goes away and does stuff which none of the actual product teams know anything about, right? So it's not really seeped into their culture. But we also want to keep our shop open while we renovate, so this meant that we
Yes.
really needed so what we decided is we decided a SWAT team approach for this. We call it the SWAT team approach, where basically we still decided to go ahead and create an infrastructure team, which is actually going to be working on the roadmap. But
Mm-hmm.
what they're going to do is they're going to work on the roadmap, uh, get to a milestone, and then go off to a particular product team, which also has that within their milestone, and help embed this change within the team itself. And this way, yes, it takes longer because they have to literally, the SWAT team members have to go team by team and embed it in each team. But the advantage is that when it happens, the whole team is working on the changes along with the SWAT team members. So it's not like another team did something to my code and now they've given me this new code and I'm supposed to work with it. But it's really like we are working together to make these changes, to decouple it, to create new pipelines, and I know what's in here for me to be able to make future changes to my little shop, which was the idea all along.
Interesting. I know that question, or that SWAT team answer came out of my question for sustainably doing this transformation alongside business as usual. But I have I mean, maybe my intuition is wrong, but could you try and link that to, like, did having a SWAT team help with the measurability of the roadmap at all? Like, did it help increase the visibility for tracking or evaluating the value that the tech transformation was having at all?
Definitely, because what so the SWAT team has two roles. One is they run a little ahead of the rest of the teams. They're basically facing the weapon, or facing the enemy, or the new technology, or whatever you call it. But then this also means that we are not making a big bang approach by adopting something and all of the teams taking time to adopt to it, and for some reason it not working, right?
Right.
So we start small and we keep moving, and then when we test it and we evaluate it and we see value in it, then we propagate it to the different product teams. So that
Right.
also
So
helps
sort of
to
links
make it
back to
measurable.
the I was going to say, it breaks down to the having everything broken down into smaller steps, because the SWAT team plays a part in working on each of those steps as it's being,
Yes.
I guess, developed or implemented, which is
Yes.
interesting. Out of interest, I don't know if you mentioned it, but I might have missed it. Who was on the SWAT team? What kind of roles or people were put onto this SWAT infrastructure team?
So I have to say, I think I'm one of the developers who I used to. I started off as a developer, of course. I still
Yes.
like to look at code, and I think the SWAT team consisted of basically a lot of developers from within the department itself, who had a lot of good ideas uh, about how things should be done, and they had a strong opinion. And we said, "Hey, you know what? If you think you have a good idea and you think you know how to do it, then you should be the one owning this." Right? So it consisted
Right.
of front end developers who knew a lot about our front end architecture. It consisted of our DevOps people, DevOps engineers who know so much about how our systems are deployed on production and the complexity of our whole deploy landscape. It consists of our architect, who has like a lot of knowledge about how our backend systems work. So really a multifunctional, cross-functional group of people, really.
Yeah. Cool. That helps a lot. Yeah, that makes sense. So just to take a step back to look at what we've spoken about, because I think there's like a lot of really useful practical detail within that. But if I'm trying to summarize the some of the things you've done to make a measurable roadmap or to build a measurable roadmap was things like giving it status, so like getting buy-in from your top level executives in the company. The other one was increasing visibility and communication, and also having like dedicated touch points, not just slotting it into an already existing meeting, but having like separate things set up. And the other one being the SWAT team approach, which I really liked as well. Was there anything else that we haven't covered in terms of increasing the measurability of a roadmap?
No, I think so. There are a few things which you can measure, and there are a few things which you must keep a close eye on, which is more difficult to measure, but
Yes.
is actually more critical to the success of your transformation. And one of the things that one of those things is really the culture and how these changes are being perceived by the teams themselves, right? Because
Interesting.
as somebody famously told me that culture eats strategy for breakfast, and I really believe that that's true.
Love that.
Uh,
Yeah.
because if I can make all the strategy that I like, but if the developers, if my team members don't believe in it, if they don't buy in, and if they don't really believe that this is helping them, then it's not going to work, right? So of course I can add a lot of metrics, I can add a lot of dashboards, lead time, cycle time, defects, all of those. But if I'm not communicating with people, if we don't have the culture of being really open and honest, then we are missing information on how this is being perceived by the team.
I think that is very interesting, because I was going to ask as well, like what kind of metrics do you track? Because on the one hand, I think it's really difficult because it totally depends on the kind of tech transformation you're undergoing. But I think a universal thing that you should track in this kind of thing is what you just said. How are teams responding to it? I think that's goes from development team. How are your developers and your engineers responding to it? And that almost ties into something you said earlier, which is that complexity question. Like if your tech transformation is not actually removing complexity and making it, because the whole point was to reduce the effort it took to do something. So if you don't feel like your engineers are experiencing that with the transformation, then it probably needs a reevaluation to see where that complexity is still cropping up. So I think that's key, and it's almost, I don't know. I wanted to say it's almost more important than like checking in with your customers, because if the people who are working on your teams aren't buying into it, then it's going to be really hard to get your customers. So I think an inward approach in this sense actually makes a lot of sense.
Absolutely. And I think uh, that's what I think we, as a company, that's also an organizational change, or I wouldn't say change, but a shift where we are saying,
Mm,
we're telling our people, you take charge in building products that you believe in, you know,
yeah,
because if
yeah,
you do that, then that's what our clients would want as well, right?
yeah.
So I think that's really
That's a quote on
important.
a book.
Yes, indeed.
um, cool. I mean, I'd love to sort of wrap this up with a final question, being what, like, throughout this entire process, and as a sort of leader in this process, like, what has been the biggest lesson for you? We may have already spoken about it, but just to sort of like bring it home, what has been the biggest lesson for you about or throughout this tech transformation?
I think for me, as a technologist, when I started, the whole the tools and technology process was actually the most interesting.
Mm,
But 1 year down, when I look at this, I think it's really about the people, you know. And if I learned one thing, then I think that it is that you should always trust your people, and you should really be patient with them. And once you have those two in place, I think the rest will come, you know. Um, the rest is semantics, really. If you trust the direction, and you trust the people, and you really
yeah,
put your
yeah.
faith in them, and you are patient with them, and you give them the time to process these changes, uh, then I think the rest is really semantics. And then you just have fun in the
Yeah.
process, kind of, you know.
Absolutely, and I mean, I think that the first time we spoke, it was really fun to hear you say that as much as it was a tech or an infrastructural transformation, it was very much a lesson in people, and that I think
Absolutely.
it's easy because you think, oh, I'm going to change my architecture, my infrastructure, so the people become secondary to that, where it is really integral. And I mean, you alluded to it with your culture metric point, and yeah, the approach that you've taken in that as well. But I think, I mean, thank you so much for sharing your insights and your experience with such a big undertaking. I think it's really useful because it is one of those things that a lot of people are very wary of doing, and are never really sure where to start. So if nothing else, I think this is a really cool way to think about approaching it, and seeing how it goes. So like I said, thank you so much for joining me, and yeah, giving me some of your time.
Thank you so much, Ramiro. It was really fun talking to you. Also helped me to reflect a little bit on everything, that, because it's so easy to keep looking ahead and thinking about all the things that need to be done, but it's nice to stop and look
Yes.
back and say, hey, we did a lot, so it was fun.
Well, I'm really glad the podcast could be a little bit of a mirror for you as well, and let you look back and reflect. But cool, thank you. It was really,
Yeah,
yeah, really enjoyed it as well.
me too. Thank you very much.